Fellas, I feel like the UFC is making a bit of a comeback in the second half of 2025. Like, if you go back to January to May of this year, this was the Great Depression of the UFC. I made multiple videos on this saying about the UFC potentially going downhill and how they're fucking up 2025. I mean, first of all, we had no mega fights for pay-per-view headliners like we expected. I thought 2025 was going to be the year of mega fights, and the first half of this year was pure disappointment. We kicked off the year with Makhachev and Moicano, which was an astronomical mismatch. Obviously, was supposed to be Makhachev versus Sarukian, but obviously Sarukian pulls out last minute. We get this fight, which even though it was the best it could have done for the first pay-per-view headliner, astronomical wrist match, not a big fight. We then had Drakus versus Strickland 2, which was a boring-ass rematch, a massively disappointing rematch. Strickland didn't do anything in this fight. He looked awful out there. I mean, I think most people wanted to see Chimaev get the shot before Strickland got a rematch anyway. And to make things worse, I mean, this was also the worst card in modern UFC history. I've made a video on this earlier on this year as well. This, in my opinion, was the worst pay-per-view in modern UFC history. So we're already on a bad start to the year. We then had Poatan and Ankalaev, which was an awful fight. I'm hoping this weekend's going to be different, but yeah, the fight was awful. There was nothing from Poatan on the feet. His output was, atrocious. Ankalaev didn't really do anything either apart from one big shot against Poatan. So this was an awful fight compared to what we expected. We then had Volkanovski versus Lopez, which I'm going to be honest, that was a great fight, great card. First great card we had of the year, even though it did feel like a bit of a second place trophy because they're only fighting for the belt because Ilya had left the division. And then we also had Belal and JDM, which again, it was a bit of a weak card, but it was a great fight. So if you look at the first half of 2025, most cards were awful. There was 0 super fights, and the only 2 fights that actually delivered for pay-per-view main events were Volkanovski and Lopez and Mohammed and Dedla Madlena. So that was another big issue. We had no mega fights. We thought this was going to be the year of the mega fights, and we didn't get any for the first half of 2025, or even any announcements. I think the second issue was the Apex card crisis. We had so many Apex cards to kick off 2025. We had 8 weak and forgettable Apex cards. That's essentially 8 weeks of shitty UFC cards, and the vast majority of them were memorable. There were a couple of good finishes on there, there were a couple of highlights, a couple of good main events, but you know what an Apex card like? It ain't stacked. The main event's usually quite weak, and we had quite a few awful main events as well in there as well. So we had 8 weeks of Apex cards to kick off the year, which we didn't really want to do. I mean, look at some cards that we actually had, like the Blankfield versus Barber one, where Blankfield pulled out, or Barber pulled out, I mean, or, Emmett versus Murphy. Look at these cards that we actually had in the UFC. These are real UFC cards in 2025. So I feel like the Apex card crisis, the continuation of awful cards in the Apex kind of, kicked off the year to a bad start. Also, decision-heavy cards as well, like the Blankfield Barber card, which had 6 out of the 9 fights went to a decision. There was only 3 finishes, and the main event didn't even happen. Or even the Usman versus Buckley card, where 9 out of 13 fights went to a decision. Or the UFC London card, where 9 out of 13 fights went to decision. So I feel like we had a lack of big highlights at the beginning of the year. We had a few big moments, like when Mauricio Houfi knocked out Bobby Green, and a couple of good knockouts here and there, but a lot of the cards, I mean, not only were they not stacked on paper, but there was a ton of decisions on there as well. Very few highlights, very few big moments. But I feel like now it's had a bit of a comeback. I feel like since UFC 315, every big card has been great. Like UFC 316, for example, it was a stacked card. Everybody was hyped up, but it actually performed pretty well. It was a great pay-per-view. UFC 317, card of the year. I think this is the best card we've had in 2025. That was a sick card. The one after that, UFC 318, there was a couple of critiques that UFC 318 weren't stacked enough, but every fight ended up being a banger. And I feel like it was kind of overhated on anyway. UFC 319, same thing, stacked and performed well. I think there's a few people disappointed with the main event, but it was still a super fight, and it's still the entire card overall performed pretty well. And every other card that we've got coming up, UFC 320, sick card, that's stacked to bits as well. UFC 321, the return of Tom Aspinall, that's a decent card too. And then we've got the super fight, Della Madlena versus Makhachev. So I feel like now we've actually got things to look forward to, and since UFC 315, since the beginning of the year, we're actually starting to get these big fights. And also the vanishing of Apex cards. I can't be the only one that's noticed that the UFC quality have got better since the vanishing of Apex cards. I mean, since May 31st and November the 1st, we've only had 2 Apex cards in that massive period of time, which must be some sort of record for the UFC. We've been going all over the globe. We've been to France, we're going to Brazil, we've been to Australia, we're going to Canada, we've been to China. So it seems like the UFC, since since halfway through this year, we've finally been going to international places. We've finally been going around the country, or not around the country, but around the world, and we've finally got rid of the Apex, and we've started to stop going to the Apex, which again, it's coincidental how we stop going to the Apex and the quality of the UFC gets better as well. I mean, there were 17 Apex cards in 2024 until November. There's only been 9 this year so far, and the vast majority of them would be before May, which again, kind of reinforcing my point that the UFC is actually starting to get better this year. And Dana White did say that he's trying to get rid of the Apex cards anyway, but I'm not really sure if he stuck to his word. But anyway, improved matchmaking as well. I made multiple rants earlier on this year about the matchmaking, the weak matchmaking that the UFC do, but I can't really critique them anymore. Like, the fights we've got coming up are actually good. Like Gamrot being actually a decent replacement for Oliveira now that Fiziev's pulled out, or Tyra versus Moreno. Perfect title eliminator to make in the flyweight division. I think that's going to be on the main card of UFC 323. The super fight that we actually asked for, that they've actually delivered, Shevchenko versus Zhang Weili, another massive fight. Or even like a Protes versus Edwards, another sick fight. Or Yuri versus Roundtree, fight of the year contender. Probably should have been a main event, but still regardless. And some of the other cards we've had in the past couple of weeks, like Silva versus Lopez, perfect main event, great matchmaking by the UFC. Ulberg versus Reyes, great kind of title eliminator in the light heavyweight division as well. And I feel like the matchmaking is finally starting to make sense in the UFC. The more fights that the UFC announce, the more I actually kind of, I'm actually getting along with it, and I'm not really sat here critiquing all the big fights anyway. And we're actually finally getting some mega fights as well. That was one of the big things we thought we were going to get in 2025, with some mega fights. And we've got a few. Madalena versus Makachev. I assume this is going to be the big mega fight of the year. And even though people wanted to see Topuria Makachev, I'm more than happy with this. You've got the undefeated in the UFC defending champion, stylistic nightmare for Makachev in JDM, who just beat the brakes off of Bilal Muhammad, against pound for pound number one Islam Makachev, moving up a weight class to chase a second belt. Both guys on massive winning streaks. This is as close you can get to a super fight. The only reason people are saying that Topuria fight is better is because Topuria's a bigger star and, he was going to sell the fight better. But as far as skill goes, this is one of the best fights you can make in the UFC right now. That's a super fight that we've got coming up this year. And even in women MMA, Shevchenko versus Zhang Weili, two pound for pound number one versus pound for pound number two. The two best women MMA fighters in the world right now. A kind of a fantasy fight that's been going on for a long time. Champion versus champion. That's another kind of super fight in women MMA. And the return of Tom Aspinall, even though he's against Cyril Gane, and I know people complaining because they wanted the Jon Jones fight, there's nothing the UFC can do about that. And I'm happy to see Tom Aspinall back in action, or even some likely announced fights. Amanda Nunes versus Kayla Harrison. Probably going to be one of the biggest fights in women MMA. That's probably going to be announced for UFC, or probably not this year, but early next year. Or Volkanovski versus Murphy. Great fight. I hope the UFC are going to announce that soon as well. And fantastic contenders in every division. I feel like we're at the spot in the UFC where nearly every division has a good bunch of contenders. Like welterweight, for example. Welterweight's killing it right now. We've got like multiple different top contenders. We've got like 3 different guys that could make a case to say they've earned a title shot, which is what you need. In every division, I'd rather have a bunch of guys at the top than very few guys at the top. So welterweight's killing it right now. We've got a bunch of contenders who are killing it. Even the lightweight division. I know lightweight's kind of suffering from inactivity, which is an issue in itself, but we've kind of got a bunch of new names at lightweight as well. We've got Max Holloway coming off a good win. We've got Paddy Pimblett on the rise. Gaethje coming off a win. We've got Sarukian, who's still in the mix as well. So lightweight is there's a lot of contenders for Topuria to take on as well. And if they match the lightweight contenders against each other, which they don't seem to be doing, that's going to be good for the UFC as well. The featherweight division. I think featherweight's in one of the best spots it's been in a while. There was a stage in the featherweight division, especially when Volkanovski was a champion, that it was kind of very repetitive, the same guys at the top. We're finally at a spot in the featherweight division where we've got a bunch of contenders, and they're all fun. Diego Lopez, probably the most entertaining guy in that division. Lerone Murphy just slept Pico. Evloev, the undefeated top contender. Yair's in the mix. Sterling's in the mix. Featherweight's in a good position too, or even the middleweight division as well. I feel like middleweight's had a complete replacement from what it was a few years ago when we had the likes of Adesanya and Whitaker and Vittori. Middleweight's got a bunch of intriguing contenders right now. You've got Imavov at the top. You've got Hernandez, who's obviously on the rise as well. You've got Randy Derrida. All the flyweight division as well. I think flyweight's got a bunch of good contenders as well. I mean, you've got Joshua Van, probably the most intriguing contender. You've got Brandon Royval, one of the most underrated fighters in the UFC from an entertainment perspective. You've got Moreno on a 2-fight winning streak. You've got Cap on a 2-fight winning streak. You've got Tatsuro Taira, who's coming off a good win as well. So I feel like flyweight's winning as well. And one of the bigger things that have happened since the beginning of this year, Jon Jones has finally fucked off as well. Jon Jones is one of the main reasons what kind of ruined the UFC in 2024 and 2025. But he won that heavyweight belt, refused to give it up. He was even going on reality TV shows and still wouldn't fight Tom Aspinall. Well, happily in May of this year, I think it was, we saw Jon Jones fuck off, which helped the heavyweight division because now Aspinall's the champion and the division can finally move on. And for the fans, the UFC Paramount deal as well, they've officially gone to Paramount. They're leaving the pay-per-view model. They're leaving ESPN, which I think is a good thing for the fans. I mean, first of all, no more pay-per-view makes everything insanely cheap for fans, and we already saw the pay-per-view model get abolished with Canelo Crawford, and that worked out to be amazing as well. So no pay-per-views, cheaper for fans, better for fans, and hopefully increased fighter pay. Obviously I say hopefully because knowing Dana White is probably not going to give him a penny, but obviously if there's anything that can be improved for the fighters, obviously we're going to support that as well. And a lot of people online are supporting this Paramount deal as well, which is obviously what you want to see because it shows improvements to the UFC as well. Now, am I saying the UFC's flawless? Am I saying the UFC's in a complete 180 and it's in the best position it's ever been? Of course I'm not. You know, Dana White, in my opinion, is still, you know, that careless promoter. He seems to be digging his nose more in boxing, signing more deals with boxing. It seems like Dana White's getting bored of the UFC, and his attention's kind of switching to boxing. We saw this in the Canelo-Crawford fight, but just in general, it seems like he cares more about boxing. I mean, he's not even showing up to some of the biggest pay-per-views press conferences. There's usually one big pay-per-view a month, and the fact that Dana can't even show up to a press conference is quite concerning. And it does seem like even when he's announcing a fight, he seems depressed, and that brings me to the next point as well, the promotion. I just think the promotion's stale. It's like the UFC isn't really trying to grow, and it's just trying to maintain. Like, it's just the same 15-minute press conferences. You can roll a dice if Dana's going to be there. The countdown show that gets repetitive, the vlog series, which I don't mind, and a cheap trailer that seems like it was made by some sort of college student. And I mean, the pay-per-views like UFC 320, for example, I feel like cards nowadays are only hyped like on fight week, and that's because of the promotion that they don't really do in the build-up. And if it is promotion, it'll be some shitty Nina drama interview posted a few weeks before. And on top of that as well, the star power issue. There's only 2 megastars in the UFC right now, with Topuria, who's looking more at boxing and has only fought once this year, and Poulton, who might not even beat Ankalaev. I know you've got the likes of O'Malley and Aspinall and Volkanovski and Pimlet and Holloway and a couple of other big names. I'm not saying the UFC has a complete lack of stars, but when it comes to megastars, people joining the casuals, that's where I kind of feel like the UFC are lacking. So I'm not saying the UFC is flawless, but I feel like the UFC, with what we've got coming up in 2026, with some of the fights that we've got coming up this year and the pay-per-views that we've got, I feel like it has made a bit of a comeback this year compared to the beginning of the year. So let me know your thoughts. Do you think the UFC made a bit of a comeback? How are you feeling about the UFC now? Just let me know your thoughts. Thank you for watching.